Hello, and welcome back to A Story for You. We are continuing on in Little House in the Big Woods by Laura Ingalls Wilder with the pictures by Garth Williams. The next chapter is called Going to Town. After the sugar snow had gone, spring came. Birds sang in the leafing hazel bushes along the crooked rail fence. The green grass grew again, and the woods were full of wild flowers, buttercups and violets and thimble flowers, and tiny starry grass flowers were everywhere. As soon as the days were warm, Laura and Mary begged to be allowed to run barefoot. At first they might only run around the woodpile and back in their bare feet. Next day they could run farther, and soon their shoes were oiled and put away, and they ran barefoot all day long. Every night they had to wash their feet before they went to bed. Under the hems of their skirts, their ankles and their feet were as brown as their faces. They had playhouses under the two big oak trees in front of the house. Mary's playhouse was under Mary's tree, and Laura's playhouse was under Laura's tree. The soft grass made a green carpet for them. The green leaves made the roofs, and through them they could see bits of blue sky. Pa made a swing of tough bark and hung it from a large low branch in Laura's tree. It was her swing because it was in her tree, but she had to be unselfish and let Mary swing in it whenever she wanted to. Mary had a cracked saucer to play with, and Laura had a beautiful cup with only one piece of broken out of it. Here's the picture for the chapter. Let me see. Yeah, you guys can see that. Okay. Charlotte and Nettie had two little wooden men Pa had made. They lived in the playhouse with them. Every day they made fresh leaf hats for Charlotte and Nettie, and they made a little leaf cups and saucers to set on their table. The table was a nice smooth rock. Sookie and Rosie, the cows, were turned loose in the woods now to eat the wild grass and the juicy new leaves. There were 2 little calves in the barnyard and 7 little pigs with the mother hog in the pig pen. In the clearing he had made last year, Pa was plowing around the stumps and putting in his crops. Here are Laura and Mary swinging on Laura's swing together. They're so good to learn to share. One night, Pa came in from work and said to Laura, "What do you think I saw today?" She couldn't guess. "Well," Pa said, "when I was working in the clearing this morning, I looked up, and there at the edge of the woods stood a deer. She was a doe, a mother deer, and you'll never guess what she had with her." "A baby deer?" Laura and Mary guessed together, clapping their hands. "Yes," Pa said. "Her fawn was with her. It was a pretty little thing with the softest fawn color and big dark eyes. It had the tiniest feet, not much bigger than my thumb, and it had slender little legs and the softest muzzle. It stood there and looked at me with its large, soft eyes, wondering what I was. It was not afraid at all." "You wouldn't shoot a little baby deer, would you, Pa?" Laura asked. "No, never," he answered. "Nor its ma, nor its pa. No more hunting now till all the wild animals have grown up. We'll just have to do without fresh meat till fall." Pa said that as soon as he had the crops in, they would all go to town. Laura and Mary could go too. They were old enough now. They were very excited, and next day they tried to play going to town. They could not do it very well because they did not know what town was like. They knew that there was a store in town, and they had never seen a store. Nearly every day after that, Charlotte and Nettie would ask if they could go to town. But Laura and Mary always said, "No, dear, you can't go this year. Perhaps next year, if you're good, then you can go." Then one night, Pa said, "We'll go to town tomorrow." That night, though it was the middle of the week, Ma bathed Laura and Mary all over and put up their hair, and they divided their long hair into wisps, combed each wisp with a wet comb, and wound it tightly in a little bit of rag. There were knobby little knots all over their heads, whichever way they turned on their pillows. In the morning, their hair would be curly. They were so excited that they did not go to sleep at once. Ma was not sitting in her usual mending basket. She was busy getting everything ready for a quick breakfast and laying out the best stockings and petticoats and dresses, and Pa's good shirt and her own brown dark calico with the little purple flowers on it. The days were longer now. In the morning, Ma blew out the lamp before they finished breakfast. It was a beautiful, clear spring morning. Ma hurried Laura and Mary with their breakfast and washed the dishes quickly and put on their stockings and shoes while she made beds. Then she helped them put on their best dresses, Mary's china blue calico and Laura's dark red calico. Mary buttoned Laura up the back, and then Ma buttoned Mary. Ma took the rags off their hair and combed it into long round curls so that it hung down over their shoulders. She combed so fast that the snarls hurt dreadfully. Mary's hair was a beautiful golden, but Laura's was only a dirty colored brown. When the curls were done, Ma tied their sunbonnets under their chins, and she fastened her collar with a gold pin, and she was putting up her hat when Pa drove up to the gate. He had curried the horses till they shone, that means brushed them and cared for them. And he swept the wagon box clean and laid a clean blanket in the wagon seat. Ma, with baby Carrie in her arms, sat up in the wagon seat with Pa, and Laura and Mary sat on the board fastened across the wagon box behind the seat. They were happy as they drove through the springtime woods. Carrie laughed and bounced, and Ma was smiling, and Pa whistled as he drove the horses, and the sun was bright and warm on the road, and sweet, cool smells came out of the leafy woods. Rabbits stood up on the road ahead, and their little front paws dangled down and their noses sniffed, and the sun shone through their tall, twitching ears. And then they bounded away with a flash of little white tail. Twice Laura and Mary saw the deer looking at them with their large dark eyes from the shadows among the trees. It was 7 miles to town. Excuse me. The town was named Pepin, and it was on the lake, on the shore of Lake Pepin. After a long time, Laura began to see glimpses of blue water between the trees. Excuse me one moment. I have naughty kitties. They're fighting with each other. It's very mean. The hard road turned to soft sand, and the wagon wheels went deep down in it, and the horses pulled and sweated. Often Pa stopped them to rest for a few minutes. All at once, the road came out of the woods, and Laura saw the lake. It was blue as the sky, and it went to the edge of the world. As far as she could see, there was nothing but the flat blue water. Very far away, the sky and the water met, and it was a dark blue line. There's a picture of the lake. Yes, there's another picture on the other page, but we'll look at that in a minute. Right. The sky was large overhead, and Laura had never known the sky was so big. There was so much empty space all around her that she felt small and frightened and was glad that Ma and Pa were there. Suddenly, the sunshine was hot, and the sun was almost overhead in the large empty sky, and the cool woods stood back with the edge of the lake. Even the big woods seemed smaller under the big sky. Pa stopped the horses and turned around on the wagon seat, and he pointed ahead with his whip. "There you are, Laura and Mary," he said. "There's the town of Pepin." There it is. Laura stood up on the board, and Pa held her safely by the arm so that she could see the town. Then she saw it, and she could hardly breathe. She knew how Yankee Doodle felt when he could not see the town because there were so many houses. Right on the edge of the lake, there was one great big building, and that was the store. Pa told her it was not made of logs. It was made of wide gray boards running up and down, and sand was spread all around. Behind the store, there was a clearing larger than the woods at home. And standing among the stumps, there were more houses than Laura could count. They were not made of logs either. They were made of boards, like the store. Laura had never imagined so many houses that were so close together. Of course, they were much smaller than the store, and not one of them had new boards that had not been grayed over time. It was the yellow color of the newly cut wood that you would see. People were living in all of these houses. Smoke rose up from the chimneys. Though it was not Mondays, some women had spread out their washing on a bush and stumps by her house. Several boys and girls were playing in the sunshine in the open space between the store and the houses. They were jumping from one stump to the next and shouting. "Well, that's Pepin," Pa said. Laura just nodded her head. She looked and could not say a word. After a while, she sat down again, and the horses went on. They left the wagon on the shore of the lake, and Pa unhitched the horses and tied one to each side of the wagon box. And then he took Laura and Mary by the hand, and Ma came beside them carrying baby Carrie. They walked through the deep sand to the store. The warm sand came in over the tops of Laura's shoes. It was a wide platform in front of the store, and at one end of it, steps went up and out of the sand, and Laura's heart was beating so fast that she could hardly climb the steps, and she was trembling all over. This was the store to which Pa came to trade his furs. When they went in, the storekeeper knew him. The storekeeper came out from behind the counter and spoke to him and to Ma. Then Laura and Mary had to show their manners. Mary said, "How do you do?" but Laura could not say anything. The storekeeper said to Pa and Ma, "That's a pretty little girl you've got there," and he admired Mary's golden curls, but he did not say anything about Laura and about her curls. They were ugly and brown. Laura, I'm sure, is just so silly to think this. She's so beautiful, I'm sure. The store was full of good things to look at. All along one side, the shelves were full of colored prints and calicos. There were beautiful pinks and blues and reds and browns and purples, and on the floor along the sides of the plank counters were kegs of nails and kegs of gray round shot, and there was a big wooden pail full of candy, and there were sacks of salt and sacks of store sugar. In the middle of the store was a plow made of shiny wood with a glittering bright plowshare, and there were steel axe heads and hammer heads and saws and all kinds of knives, hunting knives and skinning knives and butchering knives and jackknives. There were big boots and big shoes and little shoes. There they are at the store. Laura could have looked for weeks and not have seen all the things that were in the store. She had not known there were so many things in the world. Pa and Ma traded for a long time. Excuse me. The storekeeper took down the bolts and the bolts of beautiful calicos and spread them out for Ma to see and to look at and to touch with her fingers and to price. Laura and Mary looked but must not touch. Every new color and pattern was prettier than the last. There were so many of them that Laura and Mary did not know how Ma could even choose. Ma chose 2 patterns of calico to make shirts for Pa, and a piece of brown denim to make him a jumper, which is like a pair of pants. And then she got some white cloth to make sheets and underwear. Pa got enough calico to make Ma a new apron, and Ma said, "Oh no, Charles, I don't really need it." But Pa laughed and said she must pick it out or he would get her the turkey red piece with the big yellow pattern. Ma smiled and flushed pink, and she picked out a pattern of rosebuds and with leaves of soft fawn-colored ground. Then Pa got for himself a pair of galoshes and some tobacco to smoke in his pipe. And Ma got a pound of tea and some little paper package of store sugar to have in the house when company came. It was a pale brown sugar, not dark brown like the maple sugar that Ma used for every day. When all the trading was done, the storekeeper gave Laura and Mary each a piece of candy. They were so astonished and so pleased that they just stood there looking at their candies. And then Mary remembered and said, "Thank you." Laura could not speak. Everyone was waiting, but she could not make a sound. Ma had to ask her, "What do you say, Laura?" Then Laura opened her mouth and gulped and whispered, "Thank you." After that, they went out of the store. Both pieces of candy were white and flat and thin and heart-shaped, and there was print in red letters. Does this sound like a particular time? We give these at Valentine's Day. Ma read it for them. Mary's said, "Roses are red, violets are blue, sugar is sweet, and so are you." Laura's said, "Sweets to the sweet." The pieces of candy were exactly the same size. Laura's print was larger than Mary's. They all went back through the sand to the wagon on the lake shore, and Pa fed the horses at the bottom of the wagon box with some oats that he had brought for their dinner, and Ma opened the picnic box. They all sat on the warm sand near the wagon and ate bread and butter and cheese and hard-boiled eggs and cookies. And the waves of Lake Pepin curled up at the shore at their feet and slid back down at the smallest hissing sound. And after dinner, Pa went back to the store to talk a while with the other men, and Ma sat holding Carrie quietly until she fell asleep. But Laura and Mary ran along the lake shore, picking up pretty pebbles that had been rolled back and forth with the waves until they were polished smooth. There were no pebbles like that in the big woods. When each found a pretty one, Laura put hers in her pocket, and there were so many, and each was prettier than the last, that she filled her pocket full. Then then Pa called, and they ran back to the wagon, for the horses were hitched up, and it was time to go home. Laura was so happy that she ran through the sand to to Pa with all the beautiful pebbles in her pocket. But when Pa picked her up and tossed her into the wagon, a dreadful thing happened. The heavy pebbles tore her pocket right out of her dress, and the pocket fell, and the little pebbles rolled all over the bottom of the wagon box. And there's poor little Laura with her pebbles in the wagon box. Can you see? Laura cried because she had torn her best dress. Ma gave Carrie to Pa and came quickly to look at the torn place. And then she said it was all right. Stop crying, Laura, she said. I can fix it. And she showed Laura that the dress was not torn at all, nor the pocket, that the pocket was a little bag sewed into the seam of the dress and hanging under it, and only the seams had ripped. And Ma could sew it right back in again, good as new. Pick up the pretty pebbles, Laura, Ma said, and another time, don't be quite so greedy. So Laura gathered up the pebbles, put them in her pocket, and carried the pocket in her lap. She did not mind very much when Pa laughed at her for being such a silly, greedy little girl, and that she took more than she could carry away. Nothing like that ever happened to Mary. Mary was a good little girl and always kept her dress clean and neat and minded her manners. And Mary had lovely golden curls and had a heart candy with a poem on it. Mary looked very good and sweet, unrumpled and clean, sitting on the board beside Laura. Laura did not think it was fair. But it had been a wonderful day, the most wonderful day in her whole life. And she thought about the beautiful lake and the town she had seen and the big store full of so many things. And she held the pebbles carefully in her lap and her heart candy wrapped in her handkerchief until she got home and she could put it away for always. It was too pretty to eat. The wagon jolted along the homeward road to the big woods, and the sun set and the woods grew darker. And before the last of the twilight was gone, the moon rose, and they were safe because Pa had his gun. The soft moonlight came down through the treetops and made patches of light and shade on the road ahead, and the horses' hooves made a cheerful clippity-clop as they walked along. Laura and Mary did not say anything because they were very tired, and Ma sat silently holding baby Carrie, sleeping in her arms. But Pa sang softly, "Mild pleasures, oh, mid pleasures and palaces, though we roam, be it ever so humble, there's no place like home." That's the end of that chapter. That's all for our story today. Be sure to let your parents know to like and subscribe. And if you have any comments that you want to talk to me about the story, or questions that you have, or information that you have, you can tell your parents and they can put it in the comments. And then if they set up their phone or their computer, when they subscribe, then they can click on the bell, and that'll tell you every time I put a new video up. I enjoy getting this time with you. Bye-bye.